There was a kind of modesty when we made Batman Forever, which was a little bit like we think we can. And, you know, it just felt on Batman and Robin that Jack was out of the box. It just felt like the sky was the limit.
Your parents are dead, you have nothing to live for, and I'm Batman. And cut.
Batman 1989 is actually one of my favorite movies I've ever, because one, I had the VHS. So for me, having a VHS increases your chances exponentially of being my favorite movie, because I didn't have cable as a kid. So if I had a movie on VHS, that means that not only did I have the uncut version, which means like all the movies I watched that had commercial breaks, this didn't have any. And it had all the scenes, the curse words or nudity or things like that you can't see on the TV version, which was my only other avenue of watching movies, was with the commercial breaks with the good parts cut out. So being on VHS was huge. I think I got it for one of my birthdays. And I saw it like pretty shortly after it came out, obviously not in theaters because I had it on VHS. That was the first time I saw it. But I've seen this movie so many times, wore out that VHS of 1989 Batman. I didn't like the sequel as much, but I did love the franchise. Then Schumacher came along. And I don't know. He made some interesting choices. So when Tim Burton took over, prior to Tim Burton, the main Batman in the lexicon of live action was the spoofy 60s version with Adam West. And for some reason, I guess because of all the backlash of how dark the Burton movies were, they decided, hey, let's go with that 60s version. And then you had the bat nipples and the bat butt and the terrible puns, and yeah, I don't know. It's more Showgirls than Batman. It's more Showgirls than Showgirls, because Poison Ivy felt more like a drag queen than an actual woman. The way she was performing, her performance and her attitude, it felt more like she should have been in a John Waters film, more so than like a mainstream film with the way she was performing it. It was very unrealistic. I don't know. I guess there was an audience because he made two of them, but this movie just never clicked with me until I watched it as a so bad it's good. But initially I hated this movie because I love Batman and I love the Burton movies. But over time, I began to see the humor and how bad it was. But initially, I just hated this movie.
Yeah, I did not know this movie at all, I must admit. I saw the original and the sequel, and then I did not see anything after that. I had only seen the first two Batman movies. And of course, I grew up watching the reruns of the 60s Adams West Batman as well. So I loved that show when I was a kid. And I thought the first two Tim Burton movies were great. And then I just didn't see the others. I don't know why. I just didn't see them. And I didn't really hear anything about them other than I think George Clooney made a remark that he had put the franchise to bed or something, like he had destroyed the franchise or something. And I didn't understand what he meant. I just thought, okay, I guess the movie didn't do as well for some reason, and that was the end of it. But
yeah, the George Clooney interviews about this film was the first time I saw an actor outwardly trash in the movie he was in while he was promoting it.
I've read that he actually will return your money if you run into him on the street and say that you paid to see the movie. He'll pull out his wallet and give you $10 or something. He'll refund your money for seeing that movie. So I had no idea. I had no idea that this movie was so bad, and I certainly had no idea that it was so bad it's good. I just never heard anything like that. Mm-hmm. So this until we started talking about doing this show here, I didn't know, and so I watched it for the first time. And yeah, I think I was just kind of floored by it. I just didn't understand how it had come to this. Like, this was nothing like the first two movies, and I don't get it. I don't get why he did that with it.
I didn't love Batman Forever, which was the movie he did after the two Tim Burton films. I didn't love it, but it wasn't god awful. Like, you could see like, hey, it's different, not my cup of tea, but yeah, let's see what he does with another Batman movie. but he just went off the deep end.
Yeah, that's what it seems like, and I knew I was in trouble right away because in the opening sequence, they get the call that there's a problem, and they go and they wind up fighting Mr. Freeze, but they don't know that they're going to be fighting Mr. Freeze, and this is the first time that they're seeing Mr. Freeze, and yet skates come out of their boots.
Yeah.
And they skate on the ice, so they were obviously prepared with skates in their boots. But why? Why would, I mean, that's just so absurd, right?
Yeah.
And I knew right away, okay, this movie is off the deep end, just in that opening sequence.
It's worse than like cartoons have more logic than this. It's just, I don't even know who it's for, because kids don't know, or who will be watching that weren't even born or would be aware of the 60s version of Batman and the campiness of the acting. Like, I just don't know who the movie is appealing to. Like, Schumacher is a gay man, and if you didn't know that, just watch the movie. The men have nipples, the women don't. Look at, like, look at Uma Thurman's performance. Again, she performs it like a drag queen, and she's dressed like she's in drag. The only thing is she's a woman dressed as a woman instead of a man dressed as a woman, but she's more of a drag queen than anything else. If you've seen any John Waters movie, you'd swear this was a big budget John Waters movie. I just don't know who's appealing to. Gay men, kids, nostalgia for older people, for the nostalgia for the 60s version, who just jumped across the Burton version and just want nostalgia for the, like, who was this appealing to? I just didn't get it. It just made no sense. And even he, like, admitted, like, he went off the deep end in interviews about the movie.
Yeah, I've heard that too, that he's apologized in retrospect to the fans. And they also say that it's because of this movie that the whole Marvel universe kind of came about, a whole new way of making movies that were respectful to the comic books. And it's because of this. It's because of the disaster of this movie.
So you're saying something good came out of this?
Well, apparently something good came out of it, but I also have to say, Alicia Silverstone as Batgirl, she's almost not there, right? Like, she kind of shows up and she's like, doesn't really do anything, and then at the end of the movie, she just kind of finds out that they're Batman and Robin, and she just kind of joins in. But it seems to me that the story should have been more about her gradual uncovering of the situation and sort of getting involved slowly. But it's just kind of like,
this movie fails on every level: script, storytelling, structure, just every possible level. It all fails. I mean, even like the stars were sleepwalking through the movie. Like, they just looked bored. It looked like line readings more so than the actual takes. It's like, all right, great, let's shoot this for real now. It's like they never said that. They just use like all the outtakes as like all the rehearsal footage. But the only person who really gave it their all was Uma Thurman. And I guess it would have been okay if, like, maybe everybody played it campy, but everybody just kind of downplayed their performance, like they were bored in the movie itself. Even Schwarzenegger, like, he had all the puns, but he didn't even seem like he was having fun, No. And even with him, like, if he's gonna have all these puns, like, go all the way with it. There were certain times where it's like, wait a minute, you could have just did a nice pun there instead of like that lame line. If you're gonna go all the way with the puns, just go all the way with the puns. There's so many opportunities he had for good ones that he just didn't even use. I don't know. Just everything about the movie felt lazy. Nothing about it was entertaining to me, except at how bad it was. It was just like watching a car crash. And you're just like fascinated. It's like, how could they spend this much money and give this much to, and Tim Burton, the guy who put this series on the map, you couldn't give him this type of budget, I don't know. Thank God Nolan came around and kind of saved it many years later. But yeah, this is just one of those fascinating big budget kind of like movies where it's just like what they mean, obviously thinking like, let's cash in, let's homogenize this, let's not offend anyone, and then you end up with crap like this. I think there are some superhero movies that are falling into that, like the Black Adam movie. That was a huge flop, where it's just like you're trying to appease the masses. And I think Ant-Man recently flopped, Shazam recently flopped. So you're getting more flops like this, but this was kind of an anomaly at the time. I think maybe around this time you had Cutthroat Island, which was another like big budget movie. I'm not sure if you heard of that one. It was a big budget pirate movie that also flopped, but that has no real following. No one's even heard of it. But yeah, that's kind of why I kind of like said, hey, let's go with this one to kind of represent all of those type of movies. But yeah, it was just a weird choices by everyone involved, and everyone just seemed like they'd rather be somewhere else. They were just happy to cash their check, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And you raise a good point there that a lot of the other movies we'll be talking about are actually very low budget movies, right? Some of them are no budget movies. And I find it a lot easier to forgive people when they're working with a low budget or no budget and they make a movie that's bad in some way, you know, technically bad, it looks bad. But when you've got all the money in the world, you've got a huge budget, you've got a huge A-list cast, how can you make a movie this bad? It's harder to forgive that, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. There's no excuse. If you have the less money you have, the more excuse you have for poor execution. When you have all the money in the world and you still fail at every level of execution, you have no excuses. It's just fascinating. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with this list. We could have picked like all movies that were just basically all fit the same criteria, but I kind of wanted the list to bounce around a little bit where we covered everything. And this was kind of like the one like super big budget, couldn't fail movie that somehow found a way to fail that I wanted to have as part of this list. You know, it's like it's snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. You know, it's just like you have like a 99.9% chance of success, and the reason it's not 100% is because of movies like this, where it's just like, you know, this is the 100% rule. Nothing can be 100% surefire bet, because occasionally something will fail, and this is that one occasional failure where it's just like you had everything. You had stars, you had money, you had budget, you had special effects, and you still somehow failed in the execution on every level. It's one thing for Showgirls to fail, the previous movie we talked about, but even that didn't have a budget like this. It didn't have the star power like this. It didn't have the IP like this. You know, this was just a beautiful disaster.